Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Brandy Colander, and I'm a principal with the Raven Group and a member of the cohort for the She Will Rise campaign in partnership with Demand Justice. The campaign is an effort to support judicial inclusion by seeing a Black woman appointed to the Supreme Court for the first time in our nation's history. I'm honored that you're prioritizing time out of your very busy schedules to be with us for an hour today. We are gathered here to reflect on America, democracy, and the highest court in the land that holds us to account. We've assembled an extraordinary group of women to share their perspectives with you and to invite you to engage with questions and follow us on social media at Sister SCOTUS, SISTASCOTUS.org. Before we move forward, we lost an institution on Friday night. Amidst a holy day, as many around the world celebrate Rosh Hashanah. Let's pause for a moment of silence in honor of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg was only the second woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court by President Clinton in 1993. We say her name and we honor her contributions to our nation's to legacy as a shero for our daughters and our sons for many years to come. Her work is our work, and our conversation today reflects that. And with that, I'd like to introduce Kim Tignor, the Executive Director of the Institute for Intellectual Property and Social Justice, and an advisor to Demand Justice. She will now provide us with an overview of the She Will Rise campaign. Kim?
Thanks so much, Brandy. And thank you to the Raven Group for hosting us. This year has been hard. This year has been relentless. So the announcement of the passing of Justice Ginsburg was heavy with the weight of what 2020 has been and what 2021 could be. I mourned for her family, my daughters, and the countless women and girls that saw themselves in her perfectly laid collar. I immediately felt the absence of the comfort I drew from knowing that she sat on the court as a watchful warrior of principles that serve as the guardrails of how I am allowed to move in this country. My admiration for the judiciary tracks long before my time in law school. The deliberation, the steadiness, the integrity that each judge aspires to bring to the bench is difficult and a position not meant for all. Justice Ginsburg wore her judicial robe with a healthy mix of swag and integrity. She will be greatly, greatly missed. Over the past 4 very long years, the judiciary has served as the final check in the balance of our 3 branches of government. As such, this president has been determined to politicize and erode its integrity. During the Obama administration, I watched as the Senate held the judiciary hostage and created a record number of long-standing vacancies. As a result, this president leveraged the record number of vacancies to reshape the federal judiciary through the filter of his conservative litmus test. From the moment he took office, this president and Mitch McConnell have worked to load the courts with judges that would rubber stamp their dangerous actions. Together, they eroded the integrity of how judges are chosen, vetted, evaluated, and installed. 2020 has been a crash course, to say the least, in what we must hold dear: our right to quality health care, protecting the environment, safety from police as we walk down the streets or sleep in our beds, the right to organize and have our voices heard, reproductive rights, the right to vote. And while our eyes have been on the president, it is the courts that have the final say in which of these rights will remain. But the courts are only as powerful as our faith in its decisions. And our faith is drawn from the notion that the collective body of the courts understands the diversity of our shared experiences as Americans. So, how is it that one of the most engaged voting demographics, Black women, is still unrepresented or underrepresented in every branch of the government? The answer: the intersection of sexism and racism just hits different. It hits harder, it hits uglier, and from all angles. Shout out to Professor Crenshaw, who gave us the words. But it is this perspective, cultivated by erasure, dehumanization, apathy, marginalization, and yet sprinkled with determination, perseverance, creativity, inclusivity, and brilliance, that is needed on the judiciary from the top to the bottom. Black women are masters of seeing whose perspective is not in the room, whose voice was marginalized or silenced, whose contribution was ignored or erased. Our exclusion has made us masters of inclusion, and that is what is needed on the court. Hence the work of She Will Rise, a campaign to promote the first Black woman to the Supreme Court, a campaign to rebuild the bridge between the courts and the most vulnerable, the silenced, and the forgotten. A campaign to remind you that the work of these justices is not far away. It is not out of touch. It is right outside your door. A campaign to ensure that from this day forward, we understand just how important the judiciary is and how hard we must fight to protect it. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the group of women working on this campaign with me. They are creative, they are strategic, they are brilliant, they are my sisters. April Rain, Brandy Callander, Sabria Williams. This work would not be possible without you. I also want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge Demand Justice for seeing the value and understanding our vision for this campaign. Tamara, Chris, thank you. This work is needed now more than ever. But most of all, and more than anything, I want to thank our speakers today. When this event first came together, I knew it would be an important conversation. What I did not know was how much I would need it. Donna, Demetria, Nicole, you are such forces in your own right. I can't thank you for showing up and helping us create this much needed space to heal and to galvanize. Lastly, this would not be a DC event without some take action items. So you guys are leaving with homework. If you would like to get involved, please visit our website, www.sisterscotus.org, sign our petition, follow us on social media, participate in our discussions, and share your She Will Rise testimonials. We will be hosting a virtual talk on IG live tomorrow with April Rain and April Ryan, 6 p.m. EST. You will not want to miss this conversation. I'm going to hand it back over to Brandy, but I just want to thank everyone for showing up and joining us for this conversation today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Kim. And thank you all for tuning in. And we hope that as we continue to move forward in the conversation, you'll share some questions and insights. I'd like to now turn to an introduction of Donna Hilton. She's an author and an activist. She advocates for the rights and the well-being of women and girls who have been impacted by intersectional trauma. We are thrilled to have her voice and deep expertise today to speak directly on behalf of those impacted by the justice system. Donna?
Thank you, Brandy, and so great to be here speaking about this very important and timely issue. Again, my name is Donna Hilton, and I'm an activist, author, and advocate for the rights and well-being of women and girls. And in the words and the direction of Justice Ginsburg, I just want to say, I and those of us, we fight and we will continue to fight for the things we care about, but we will do it in a way that will lead others to join us. And we hope you join us. The impact of Supreme Court decisions has never been more critical and critically important to Black women, who, for the entire 231 years of the court's existence and the 40 years since the first woman was nominated and confirmed, have had no representation on the highest court in the land. This fact is in direct contrast to our heroic investment as voters and civic participants and our considerable numbers of qualified potential nominees. Black women in our society are disproportionately subject to abject trauma as well as early and unjust criminalization. The rate of growth of female incarceration of predominantly Black and brown women has exceeded 750% in a quarter of a century. I having been one of those statistics, with victims of violence and sexual abuse accounting for approximately 95% of the state and federal prison and local jail populations, where they continue to be repeatedly re-traumatized. Yet the documentaries, books, research studies, and nightly news stories about mass incarceration, disparities in our judicial sentencing, and police brutality, often the image and experience of Black women are left out. Negation is a burden which ensures that we will be unseen and unheard and guarantees our continued exploitation through systemic racism and misogyny. The first time I spoke to a broad audience on these matters was at the Women's March in 2017 in Washington, D.C. And from that time until this very day, I have received death threats for daring to discuss matters of justice as a formerly incarcerated woman, Black woman, convicted, yes, of a violent crime. I am not that conviction. I was traumatized as a young woman. I was every adult in my life that represented a system, traumatized me, raped me, and abused me, as well as my daughter. I was desperate to escape, and with no resources or support, I was vulnerable to coercion. Although the police were clear that I was not involved in the fatal outcome, my case's prosecution was zealous and sensationalized. Not once was the entirety of my story or my history considered. And in fact, neither was the story about the victim, Mr. Vigliarola. Never was I even asked who I was and how I got there. I received a sentence of 25 years to life and was granted parole after 27 years. In the inhumane environment of prison surrounded by women, there, due to a staggering range of circumstances with the common thread of trauma and abuse, I began to understand why and how my life had taken such a turn. In the time since my release, I founded a nonprofit to help me do the work of providing the practical help and space that justice-impacted women need to understand their own lives and to turn them around. We need Black women at every judicial level who will understand and empathize with our system's toll and Black blood and Black treasure. If we are generally having a racial reckoning in our nation, then a Black woman must be nominated and confirmed to the Supreme Court of the United States by the next president of the United States. And I say this right now in this moment to understand that the attacks and the vitriol that we continue to face is only happening because people don't understand. People are not getting it. Violence and trauma continues to permeate the very existence, the very fiber of who we are as a people, who we are as a nation, who we are as Black women. It is time that this stops. It is time that we do better. It is time that we change the narrative that's been scripted and created for us. The time is now to end the violence and the trauma and the lies and the negation of Black identity, Black womanhood, Black sisterhood, Black people. The time is now. Join us. She will rise.
I'm moved. So Thank you for sharing your story, Donna. Truly. The negation. One of the things that you mentioned was nominated and confirmed. And as Kim provided an overview, I think it's really important for our audience today to know that it is not just about the nomination. It is getting her on the bench. And the Raven Group for years has done a lot of work to support nominations. And one of the things that was learned through the Justice Sotomayor process was the importance of making sure that there is support for these candidates to actually get confirmed and the infrastructure to support that. And that is core to what the She Will Rise campaign seeks to do. I want to just remind our audience, number one, we're glad that you're here with us today, and we really encourage you to drop your questions in the comment box. We are turning now to our fireside chat with Nicole Hannah-Jones and Demetria Lucas. Nicole Hannah-Jones is a Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter who covers racial injustice for the New York Times Magazine and the creator of the landmark 1619 Project. In 2017, she received the MacArthur Foundation Fellowship, known as the Genius Grant, for her work on educational equality. We are grateful for her contributions today, and as we reflect on her work educating us on American history and our goals for decades to come, this will certainly be an enjoyable chat. And then we also have Demetria Lucas, who's an award-winning author, journalist, and media personality with a penchant for cultural commentary. Her insanely popular advice online column, Ask Demetria, reflects her witty insights and magnetic approachability. We are thankful for her contributions today by asking the questions that many of you want to hear as we explore these issues. Ladies, the floor is yours.
Hi, Nicole.
Hey.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Great. I have so many questions for you. And do you mind, can we just jump right into it?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So the first, I think the most obvious question is, after 130 Supreme Court justices, after given Black women's overwhelming engagement in politics, in social issues, in everything, with our high numbers of education, with a vast number of qualified Black women, how is it possible that we've never had a Black woman as a Supreme Court justice? Like, I can say racism and sexism, but I feel like it goes way deeper than just that overview.
Yes. So one, thank you, She Will Rise, for hosting this important conversation, which clearly has become even more critical just in the last few days with the passing of Judge Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And the answer to that is pretty simple. Black women sit at the intersection of all oppression. Black women are amongst the most marginalized. They face both race discrimination and gender discrimination. And so when we consider that there's only ever been 2 Black people on the Supreme Court at all, one, of course, Thurgood Marshall being the very first Black person on the Supreme Court appointed by Lyndon B. Johnson, and then Clarence Thomas, who many would not consider reflective of the vast majority of Black Americans, then it's not actually surprising. Black women earn the least money, even though we have higher levels of education. We are underrepresented across fields. And this simply is the Supreme Court, which is the highest court in the land. You serve on it for life. There have been very few women. There have been very few people of color, only 3 people of color in the entire history of the court. It should not be shocking that there has not been a Black woman, but it should be unacceptable.
Agreed. And I'm glad that you brought up Thurgood Marshall and Clarence Thomas, because I think that saying that we want a Black woman, it's about more than just melanin. It's about more than a figurehead. We want someone who actually supports Black women's issues, who represents Black people, Black women specifically, but also represents good sense and issues that are pertinent to the Black community. So when we say we want a Black woman on the court, what, I guess, type of Black woman are we looking for?
So that's a very fraught question, of course, because we can't let someone's politics determine whether they're Black or not. But we know that what Black people want, what Black voters want, what Black citizens want is not simply, as you said, a figurehead or a person who will play a token role where we can say that phenotypically they are Black, but are they really going to be ruling in ways that are reflective of the needs and the wants of Black Americans. Now, the court is not supposed to be political, but we understand that when you are appointing people to the court, you're appointing them based on how they're going to interpret the Constitution. And typically, of course, Black Americans have interpreted the Constitution as a liberatory document, as a document that seeks to expand and protect rights. And so I would imagine most would want a Black woman who also views the Constitution in that way, not as a document that is going to inhibit and shrink rights, but that will be an expansive view of the Constitution. So that's really what is critical. It is not really, I mean, it will be a victory either way if there's a Black woman on, but I think it will feel like a high victory if it is a Black woman on the court that is not reflective of the realities of typical Black experience.
So in the passing of Justice Ginsburg, a lot of people are very immersed in conversations around the Supreme Court, and people are very sad. Like, you hear people say, I am sad, this is scary, or we're screwed. What are, I mean, I'm just telling you what people are saying, but what are the issues that are on the table that so many people are so worried about? Like, what can happen? I guess I don't want to say like the wrong person. If someone who doesn't, I guess, sort of follow in the ideals of Justice Ginsburg, what is at stake here?
So a lot. The Supreme Court is kind of the final of so much in society, and particularly when it comes to Black Americans. Black people have not, we have not been to rely on elected officials to vindicate our rights, particularly of citizens, because we are a minority. We are a 13% minority, most marginalized minorities. And so oftentimes where we have seen big advancements, it has had to come to courts, because instead of having events, an entire legislative body or the majority of citizens rely on a single person or a panel of judges, lifetime appointees, and can actually make these more politically toxic decisions that large numbers of white Americans would oppose without risking their jobs. They have more freedom. The inverse of that, though, means that they are elected for life. And so having someone on the Supreme Court, particularly if they're appointed as a younger justice who might be ruling for 30 years or 40 years on the court, can affect generations of law. So of course, we know the biggest things on the table right now are Roe v. Wade. Will we have a court that will continue to protect a woman's right to choose, and civil rights? So we have seen, most of us believe that Brown v. Board of Education, considered one of the most important, if not the most important civil rights ruling, or Supreme Court ruling in the history of the court. We thought that that was settled. But Trump has shown that many of the judges that he has appointed actually don't believe that Brown v. Board of Education is settled. And there is a great fear that something that seemed untouchable in terms of what the Constitution demands for Black equality could actually be under attack. Also other areas, voting rights, housing segregation, and of course, healthcare. We know that there's a case about Obamacare going before the Supreme Court right now in the middle of a pandemic that could strip millions of Americans of their access to healthcare. So there's a lot at stake. And that's just what's at stake right now. We're talking about justices that can be determining the law of the land for, again, 30 years.
Can I ask you what you think the likelihood, because we're doing this campaign, and I definitely believe that a Black woman belongs on the Supreme Court. I think it's overdue, way past time. I can't believe it hasn't happened thus far. But given, I don't know what word to use, the chaos, I guess, that has erupted since Friday in the passing of Justice Ginsburg. I want to say, like, when Obama was in office, and forgive me, I don't remember the justice that passed. Was it Scalia?
Scalia.
Scalia, thank you. When Scalia passed away, it was 11 months left in Obama's term, and the Senate said, no, like, you're not getting a justice, you're not going to nominate. And now we have 2 months before an election where Trump's term could end. And Trump and the Senate, Mitch McConnell, are trying to push someone through as fast as possible. This is their goal. So will there be an opportunity for a Black woman to be on the court anytime soon? Is that possible under Trump even?
I mean, anything is possible. And I think this is a case where be careful what you wish for, because it's certainly possible that Trump could appoint a Black woman, but it's also very possible that it could be just as cynical as it was when the second Black Supreme Court justice became Clarence Thomas. You can certainly find a Black woman who is extremely conservative, who is a strict constructionist, who is going to align with the most conservative people on the court. And that, again, will be a hollow victory. So, and in some ways, again, that is a very cynical choice, because it puts Black people in the position of having to argue against the first Black woman to go on the bench, because the first Black woman is not someone whom we feel will actually serve our communities well. So yeah, that's possible. I also think that, we are in a period where there are no rules. All of the former ways of doing things, Republicans don't play by those rules anymore. Clearly, they have immediately turned upon what they said under Obama about not appointing in an election year, and they don't care. So there's going to be a very big and blatant fight over this issue. And I don't know who's going to come out winning. It depends if there are enough, a handful of Republicans who are willing to actually stand by what they said a year ago. And it doesn't bode well.
Doesn't bode well. One thing that I've noticed, even when I was talking about this online, I was promoting this engagement to my following. There are not a lot of Black men in this discussion. It's largely Black women pushing for this issue, and Black women typically, actually not even typically, nearly all the time, like 99% of the time, if there's an issue where it pertains to Black people, in general, Black women are at the front lines. But this is the issue that is, I don't think it pertains to Black people, but it's, putting a Black woman, centering a Black woman. And I don't see many Black men here. Why are more men not involved in this push for a Black woman as a Supreme Court justice?
I don't know the answer to that, and I don't want to speculate. I think it is clear, though, that Black women, as you said, have long been at the forefront, and particularly now. We've always been there, but have been pushed more to the back, and we're refusing to stay in the back. And we are playing our unprecedented role in saving this democracy. If you look at the voting, Black women voted against Trump at between 97 and 98%, which is in the margin of error. So I often said, I think the only Black women who actually voted for Trump were Diamond and Silk. Now, that may not be
Candace
true.
Owens.
Right?
Moving along.
But Black men had the second highest rate of voting against Trump, but still significantly less than ours. They were about between 87 and 90%. So I think it's clear that Black women, more than any other group, vote for community. We vote against policies that are hurtful to other people. And that comes from our unique experience. I don't know in general, though, that Black people are as involved in advocacy and the fight over the Supreme Court. I think for many of us, we are just used to not being represented on that court and not expecting to be represented on that court. So that's why I think this movement is so important, because it has to put that on the table for us in a way that it typically has not been. We tend to be much more concerned about elected politicians and how can we get representation amongst elected politicians. And we're not often looking to a court. And why should we? There's been 2 Black people ever on the history of the court, period. So I think starting to build this as a political issue for us is very critical.
Can you give me some talking points? So for me, with my following, for the women who are listening, they're here, they're engaged, they want to know more. When they go out and they tell people, like, this is why we need to be more concerned about a Black woman being on the Supreme Court. This is why it's a big deal. This is why we should pay more attention to what's happening with the courts. What are our talking points? What do we tell people to help them get engaged here?
Yeah, I mean, one, it's just time. We've been here for 401 years now. And you cannot have institutions that are reflective of your democracy if they are not reflective of your democracy. It is not that there's never been a qualified Black woman in the 200 and something year history of the Supreme Court. There have been many qualified Black women. They just have never received a chance. We can look at in the appellate court. I think when I looked it up, there's only been 5 Black women who've served on the appellate court in the history of this country. So what does that mean? Justice is, there was a reason that Black people, for most of the history of this country, were not allowed to sit on juries, were not allowed to bring cases before courts themselves, were prohibited from going to the law schools across the South, because there's an understanding of how important the courts are to pursuing justice, and they set the law of the land. Along with Congress, they determine how do you interpret the Constitution. What is the law of the land? When you don't have representation on those courts, then your communities are not receiving the equal justice that we deserve. That is why it's important. It is about, are we receiving equal justice? There is a lie that the judges are just objective. Judges are viewing the law through the prisms of their own experiences and how they interpret the law because of those experiences. And having a Black woman, not just one. I mean, what I loved about Ruth Bader Ginsburg is when she was asked, when will there be, what's the right number of women on the court, right? And she said 9. And she said people were so shocked at that, because how could she say 9? And she said, well, no one ever worried all those years when all of the justices were men. It was never a problem. But to say that all the justices should be women is a problem. So we're past the period of tokenism. There's never, Ruth Ginsburg was, for the first time for brief periods, was the only woman on the court, which has been the typical case. You get one and you trade. When that person gets off the court, you trade one in for another. We've only ever had one Black person on the court at a time. We've now only ever had one Latina person on the court ever. And it is time that we show that it's not about tokenism. And if you have more than one Black person and more than one Black woman on the court, that too is reflective of America, and actually much more reflective of a meritocracy than the courts we've had, which have been all male and all white.
All white, yes. Do you have any picks for who you'd like to see on the Supreme Court?
No, I mean, that's not the type of thing that I would wade into. No, but there's tons of women that could be chosen from. There's women, Black women federal judges, both at the appellate level and the district court level. I mean, there again, it is not a matter of whether there are qualified Black women to be on the court. It's whether we choose to put a qualified Black woman on the court.
I'm looking at the comments on the side, and there are questions coming in, and one of them is, a justice doesn't come to the bench just for the issues now, but for a generation, given the number of years they serve. How important is a Black woman's life experience perspective over the next decades?
I mean, it's going to be critical. Look at where we are in the country right now. We have seen a court that has spent the last several decades chipping away at Black people's not just Black people's rights, but at civil rights. They've chipped away at how the law treats school segregation, housing segregation, and of course, critically, voting rights. So having a Black woman on the court for generations, and not just that, but appointing a court that is less conservative in general is going to have a huge impact. One thing that Black people always have to vote for, we can't tend to be aspirational in our vote. We have to tend to vote to protect the rights that we have. That's why Black people are a monolithic voting bloc, even though we are not a monolithic people. And rights protection is going to be one of the most critical aspects of whoever is on the Supreme Court, or it's going to be someone who is further chipping away from the rights that Black people have fought so hard for.
Can I go back to a statement that you made earlier? You were talking about not just the women at the Supreme Court, you were talking about the judges at the lower levels, which is where people are plucked from to get to the Supreme Court. So can we talk about how important it is to, I guess, vote for judges or support Black women at the lower levels of the judicial system so they have a chance to get to the highest level?
Well, one, that's much more important because most cases never make it before the Supreme Court in the first place. It's at your county level with your county elected judges, it's your state judges, your state Supreme Court judges that actually have the most impact on everyday citizens' lives. You know, the Supreme Court rejects the vast majority of cases that people would like to see before it. So of course it is critical that we have Black women through every step of the legal process. We, again, cannot expect to have equality before the law if there is not representation in those who are actually the arbiters of the law. You know, we have definitely seen a lot more progress at the county level in terms of Black women being elected as judges. We've seen far less progress at the state level, and then clearly at the federal level. But yeah, you have to have kind of your farm team. That's what the lower courts are. They're the farm team to be able to build up and eventually become a federal judge, and hopefully at some point a Supreme Court judge.
I'm seeing another question. It says the Voting Rights Act will cease in 2031. It's not a question, it's just a statement. We need to save our rights. Can you speak to what's going on with the Voting Rights Act? Because this is something else. I think that a lot of people, if you're not involved in this conversation, and you touched on it a bit, like just because you were given the rights to do something doesn't mean they exist forever. Like it can be given, it can be taken away. Just like you said with Brown versus the Board of Education, or what some people are thinking about Roe v. Wade, or as to this question, the Voting Rights Act. So can you speak about that a bit?
So the Voting Rights Act doesn't expire, but certain provisions and protections within the Voting Rights Act have to be reauthorized by Congress. And the problem is that is not something that the court does. The court rules on aspects of a Voting Rights Act or if it is challenged, but the court can't determine whether the Voting Rights Act is extended or not. That is up to Congress. So we have to vote in people in Congress who are actually going to be willing to not just extend the Voting Rights Act, but really the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted by the Supreme Court in Shelby v. Holder. Some of the key enforcement provisions were actually struck down by the conservative court. We need to elect people to Congress who will actually replace through legislation those important aspects of the Voting Rights Act. So there isn't one lever that we need to be pulling. There are multiple levers that we need to be pulling right now. Supreme Court, lower courts, and definitely our elected officials in Congress. So I'm wearing this vote button right now because it is, I don't like to engage in hyperbole, but this is certainly the most important election of my lifetime. And Black women don't ever sit out, but we have to get the rest of our folks to make sure that they're showing up as well.
All hands on deck for all levers. All levers, all hands. I love it.
Sure.
We've got another question. It says, this is from Brandy. White males have been treated as quote unquote neutral under the law. We've seen that challenged by Sotomayor and others. Isn't adding Black women key to resetting this bias?
Yes, that's easy. Yes. I don't know about that. I would say resetting the bias, but it's certainly, again, what Sonia Sotomayor, I think, has done so well is really call out this notion that judges are ruling based on this neutrality and objectivity as if their experiences don't matter. Because what she has said is when I'm ruling on something like civil rights, I'm not ruling based on some abstract notion of the law. I'm ruling based on my own experience and what I know to be true and how I know that these laws can impact real people's lives. And she's been very vocal about that. And a Black woman would surely similarly play that role. And that's certainly the role that Thurgood Marshall played as well. Clarence Thomas, not so much.
Mm. we keep doing, we jab and we back away. We jab and we back away. Let's see, there's another question. If McConnell moves for a vote on November 4th, before November 4th, what should we do? On November 4th. It moves on November 4th. What should we do?
Oh, I'm a journalist. I'm not an activist. I'm not the person who can answer that question. And I don't know outside of, applying pressure to your people, except I would imagine most of the people who are watching this, their Congress people are not the Republicans, right? They're not the constituency of the people who make this decision. So I'm not sure if there's activists would have to answer that question to do. All I could say is pray.
Oh, well, prayers, marching, activism, all of those things tend to work. I have a whole list of questions. I'm sorry, they're like written. Can we talk a bit, because I think we touched on it, but we didn't get into it. Can we talk about the systemic dynamics of the legal system that have kept Black people and women especially from judicial roles? Because like we said, they're qualified. There's a pool of women who are practicing the law, who are doing great jobs, but there are barriers that are in the way, and not just running for elections, not just voting, but there's just barriers to getting to the bench.
Yeah, I mean, the system is built in structurally to produce what it has always produced. I mean, one, you have to go to a good enough K-12 public school to get the type of education that allows you to go to law school. Then you have to pass the LSAT, even though we know that oftentimes Black people are not getting the same type of education. Then you have to kind of get in the network, because that's how judges are often appointed. They are often then, well, there's two things. So elected judges are almost always elected county-wide. It is very hard for Black people to win county-wide office unless it is a county that is majority Black. And even in that case, sometimes it can be a challenge. So just structurally, getting enough votes in a county-wide election can be very hard for Black people. If it's an appointed position, folks appoint within their own networks. That's how the world works. So judges and the elected officials who are making appointments tend to look within the pool of people that their constituents have recommended, that their donors have recommended. And so we don't tend as Black women to be in those pools. So you have to diversify our elected officials oftentimes to be able to diversify those who actually get elected into the judiciary. So there are a lot of the same structural challenges that Black people face in every aspect of society. We certainly face when it comes to working in the law and becoming judges.
Okay. We've got another one from the audience. It says, you have learned from your work on the 1619 Project how folks can attack your recount of history. What have you learned from that we can apply in this campaign?
That's a good question. Well, one, don't fight people on Twitter like I do. We'll start with that.
I follow you on Twitter, so I'm like, you are doing the Lord's work, the good fight.
I think the thing that you can learn is you actually cannot be concerned with all of the bad faith attacks that you're going to receive in trying to do this work. What you're going to hear is people who have benefited from a system built on racial caste, who will then try to tell you that it is racist to be asking for a Black woman on the court. They will say, we should just be looking for the best person. We should be colorblind like Dr. King. They will evoke all of these bad faith arguments, even as they ignore that there's never been a Black woman on the court. So I think you have to be able to get the type of, be prepared for those bad faith arguments, and to be able to make the case on why it is essential to have a Black woman, that representation matters, because those are the arguments you're going to hear. I can hear them already, that this entire campaign is racist. It's the same arguments that they used against people who are advocating for Biden to pick a Black woman. All of a sudden, I think I said this, when you've never had a Black woman before and no one called that affirmative action or racist, it can't be racist now that people are saying we should have one. And so that's the fight, is pushing back against people who will be trolling and who will pretend that they don't understand the history of this country and think that it's a problem to specifically ask for a Black woman on the court.
Right. Can I ask you a question about the 1619 Project?
Yeah, sure.
When you develop this project and when you put it out into the world, it goes into publish. Did you know it was going to be as big as it became? Like, not even thinking about the Pulitzer, which is, huge, right? But just the feedback from the country, from the readers, from the president.
Yeah, absolutely not. I just pitched the project that I felt needed to be done. And had no idea. In fact, right before publication, I was suffering from deep anxiety because I was worried that we would have created this thing. I would have asked for all of these resources and it would go out into the world. And because it's about slavery, no one would care. So I certainly had no prediction that the project would become as big as it would. And nobody, I mean, had you told me a year ago that the 1619 Project would be part of Trump's reelection campaign,
yeah,
I would have been like, you have lost your damn mind. That is ridiculous. It would have sounded like the craziest thing I'd ever heard. And yet here we are. I think part of what led to the success of the project, I think it's an amazing project. We worked really hard on it. We were determined to be unflinching in the argument. But I also think that it came out in a moment where people really were trying to figure out, how did our country get to where we are? How did we end up with a white nationalist in the White House? Had the project come out under President Obama, I don't know that it would have received the same reception, because people wanted to believe we were post-racial under Obama. And I can imagine people would have said, why are you dredging this up now? There's a Black man in the White House. But you can't really make that argument with who we have in the White House now. And people wanted to know, what about our country could go from Obama to Trump? And I think the 1619 Project provided a very clear roadmap. But in short, no, absolutely not. I had no idea. And I had no idea that a year later, people would still be trying to take the project down. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah. What do you think of, is it the 1776
commission? Yeah.
Girl, what did you think when you heard about it?
I just thought it was, one, just more bluster from this administration, but also, just the fact that people think somehow we need to have 1776 vindicated, or that there needs to be some patriotic education. It should be deeply troubling to all Americans, no matter what their political affiliation, that the federal government is seeking to censor a work of American journalism, that the federal government wants to implement a curriculum to indoctrinate our children into some narrative. We should all be worried about that. I don't know that anything will come of it, but I think it is clear that Trump sees the 1619 Project as part of his campaign to rile up white voters with a sense that something is being taken from them. And so the 1776 Commission is to tell them they're trying to take your vaulted history of American exceptionalism, and we're going to provide you some red meat for that. And that's largely what I think it is.
It is. Thank you. We have another question. What should people demand of senators when recommending potential federal judges? That's the question.
I don't know.
You're like, I am a journalist.
Yeah, and I don't cover the courts, but I imagine it's the same way that when constituents are lobbying for anything that they want, you should make clear what you're looking for. I want a judge that, what are the important things that you want a Supreme Court judge to hold up? What are your main concerns? What do you want from your justice? And those are the things that you lobby your senators for. What I have learned is it actually doesn't take a great deal of people lobbying for them to listen. They're not used to hearing from a ton of constituents sometimes. And if there is an organized campaign around things, they do tend to listen. The problem is right now is that the Republicans have the majority in the Senate, of course, that ultimately confirm a Supreme Court pick. So again, where we are is in a position where if this gets filled under the Trump administration, Black Americans don't have a ton of political sway with the people who will ultimately be making the decision. That doesn't mean don't organize and fight, because we absolutely should. We can't just cede this ground, but we are in a very precarious position at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like even though we don't have necessarily like the largest numbers, we do make a lot of noise. And when we do so, people tend to listen. So it's worth, like you said, pulling all the levers, making all the noise, getting in the faces and making ourselves heard. I guess just from like a very practical standpoint, what can we all do to get involved? Make sure a Black woman is nominated to serve on the Supreme Court. Is anything practical?
Yeah, I mean, vote.
Vote.
Organize other people to vote, help people get to the polls, help push back. There's so much disinformation happening right now where people don't know how to vote. They don't know if they can do mail-in voting. They don't know if their vote is going to be counted. And I think it's incumbent on all of us to push back. I have young neighbors, and I was like, have you registered to vote? They just moved into the state and they hadn't. And I'm shocked because I'm like, do you know what's happening in our country right now? So it's necessary for all of us to try to like grab other people and help them understand how important voting is. And then on top of voting, organizing and lobbying for the things that you want. One of the biggest frustrations, of course, that so many Black women have is that we are the base of the Democratic Party. We come out for the party. We get the church buses, we get voters out. And then once the election is over, we get dropped like a bad habit. Like all of the concerns and needs that we have suddenly are no longer central to the campaign. And the only way that we can ensure that doesn't happen is to keep the pressure up. Once the election is over, to keep the pressure up and make sure. I mean, I was so amazed at how Black women this campaign cycle were so relentless in saying, no, it's not this time. It's not going to be enough just to say you're going to appoint a woman. You need to pay us back for our loyalty. And they were successful. And I think we could learn a lot around the organizing that occurred over the vice presidential pick for this campaign as well.
Yeah. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, you just touched on it, is the Disinformation Campaign. What ways can we not fall victim to that? Because I feel like you go on social media and you see so much of it looks legitimate. And people have conversations and they're reading headlines and photos or captions, but they're not actually reading articles. Like, how do we stop the disinformation, make sure that we're actually informed about what's actually happening?
This is a huge, huge issue. And particularly with Russian involvement in the disinformation campaign, they have long studied America and they understand that the divide where they can be most effective is the racial divide. And there's a ton of like reporting and studies on this. So they are intentionally providing disinformation targeted to Black Americans. That's what happened during the first Trump campaign for the presidency. It later came out that the Russians were particularly targeting Black Americans, and that is still happening right now. So the most important thing we need to do, stop getting your information from memes, stop getting your information from Facebook posts, and are you actually getting your information from a credible news source? That is so key. I can't tell you how many times people share some video of some person. You don't know who that person is. They sound smart, so you believe what they're saying, or they're sharing, a meme that says something that isn't true. We have an obligation to take that additional step and to be informed voters and informed citizens. Try to find and track down the source. And if you cannot track it down to a legitimate source, you need to discount that information. That's so important. Stop sharing stuff on Facebook just because it has a lot of likes, but that you actually haven't worked to verify. And the other problem is a lot of times now they're getting more savvy. So it will actually look like a legitimate news source. It will have a name that sounds like a legitimate news source. It will look like a newspaper. But if you've never heard of it in your life, just take 2 seconds on Google. Put the name of the news organization in Google and see, is it actually legitimate? This is going to be so critical. They are going to try to intimidate us from going to the polls, to try to give us the wrong information about the polls, to give us the wrong information about the presidential candidates and what they stand for. We cannot allow ourselves to be manipulated in that way. And tell your friends. I will post in there and be like, this is not a true story or legitimate news site. You need to delete this. And we need to be doing that all the time. It's harmful. It's really harmful.
It's also really hard though, because sometimes like the actual news can be crazy. Like you're just like, wait, that's fake. Like, wait, no, he actually tweeted that. That's real. That happened.
That's true.
Yeah. What else did we talk about? There was one other thing, and now I'm pulling like a blank in my head. I don't know. I'm sorry. I just had a complete blank. I just had like a complete mind fart. It was about disinformation. Oh, can we also stop? And I know I'm guilty of this too, and I know you do it too, but the arguments with like the people that are probably bots that make no sense whatsoever I'm like, it's just not helping the discourse. And I do it, like I argue with people because I'm like, how did you come up with this? Like, this is so crazy. Like, I have to stop you. But it really does nothing but take away. Like, it drains my energy to talk about things that are more important.
It does. And you actually, right. I mean, that's how bots work. They need engagement. And every time, and yes, I totally suffer from this because I also feel like you just said something crazy. I need to correct what you just said, but it's actually not useful. I've just started using my block a lot more copiously, because the way that it works is a bot says something, you engage, and that actually feeds the bot, right? And so it is much worse. And we are in a landscape where we cannot always tell who is a real person, who is not a real person. And it's hard for me because I don't like to choose who I engage with by their number of followers. You know, there was a time I had 300 followers and I still had something important to say, and it didn't make me less of a person worth engaging with. And so I try to engage with people even if they have a low follower count, but I've realized that is particularly now, because there is so much efforts to really get involved in this election from foreign entities. We just have to be super careful. Just shut it down. Just
shut it down. I think that's so important. And unfortunately, we have to shut down this part of the interview. You have been amazing. Thank you for your time and for your insight and sharing your gifts with us. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. So Brandy, are you still with us?
I'm still here. Thank you, ladies. That was fun. Really, really appreciate the exchange. A few things that I just want to make sure we lift up. The fact that the Supreme Court session starts on October 5th, ladies, and it's going to be, the blessing and the curse of COVID, of course, virtual, which means we now can engage in a way that we perhaps have never been able to engage before. If you didn't have access, if you couldn't get to DC, stand outside in the front steps to be able to be among the few to enter that small courtroom, we can now access the Supreme Court in real time. And it's also important for us to lift up, as 6.8 million and counting Americans have been infected with the COVID virus, that we also are acknowledging the 200 almost thousand and counting Americans that have died as a result of the COVID pandemic. And the fact that we have, and I get emotional talking about this, having parents who have recovered for it and friends who have lost parents from it, and it is a real thing. And as we continue to think about how we deal with it, we also have to be thoughtful of how this is so relevant to the Supreme Court, who will be making decisions around who has access to healthcare on November 11th as they review ACA. I want to thank you all for your time today, your questions, your engagement. 8 states have already started voting. We are a little over a month away from elections up and down the ballot. These issues are real now, today. If you never cared about the Supreme Court before, the whole goal of this conversation was to make it engaging and approachable so that you understand the connection. We need you in the arena. We need you engaged. Today's discussion moving forward will be available on the sisterscotus.org website, Demand Justice, their YouTube channel, their Facebook page. Please make sure you visit these outlets to stay current on action items, next steps, how to stay engaged, t-shirts, mugs. We also would like for you to join our cohort member April Rain and journalist April Ryan tomorrow evening on Instagram Live at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And then I also want to mention to you another engaging opportunity with the March on Washington Film Festival that starts tonight, and that's available on marchonwashingtonfilmfestival.org. And that just has it gives you a chance to see incredible content with diverse stories. And a lot of times those stories lead to the Supreme Court. So with that, thank you all for your time, your dedication. Stay in the arena, stay encouraged. And the Raven Group, She Will Rise, and all of our guests and speakers today, be well. Thank